Well, it may be the international break for the EFL Championship, but there is no rest for us because we are back today with our second manager special of the new season. And it's a familiar name for those on the podcast because Watford have decided to go at it again. They have replaced the manager after just 10 games in charge and brought back an old familiar face to Vicarage Road. We'll talk about the old man, the new man, and what we expect from the rest of the season with Watford. And of course, I'd like to get your thoughts as well. If you're a Watford fan, if you're another Championship fan, what do you make of the appointment? Of course, as always, with these Watford manager specials, we do have to address the elephant in the room before we start, which is, obviously, I'm a Luton fan. And to be fair, I can't really talk in this instance because there's plenty going on down the road as well. And it's not going too well for us. But we are always fair. We're not a clickbait channel. We're not one of those who tries to rile up the fans and all that sort of stuff. It will be a genuine, fair, balanced opinion on the change that Watford have made. So let's very quickly, before we move on to the new man, or the replacement, shall we say, who's coming back for his second stint, let's talk about Paulo Pezzolano, because it's the one manager special I didn't get to do in the summer because it happened when we were away. But he came in as a young, exciting head coach who had a decent record in his short career so far and experiences across a number of different countries, having started in Uruguay, but then across Central and Southern America, and of course in Spain as well, where he did a notable job with Valladolid. And he came into Watford, and while it looked a decent appointment on the face of it, he was a very solid manager. It maybe didn't look like the best fit in terms of style of play mixing to players and what Watford were trying to do, which they've alluded to in their statement a bit later on for Javi Gracia as well. And that's maybe why we've seen a slower start and a lot of reports and murmurings coming out of the club early on. But perhaps what's the most interesting about this is that the decision has come after Watford's best week of the season. They picked up 7 points in the last 3 games, and I know a few will say not the most convincing of performances, and against 3 of the bookies' 5 relegation favourites in pre-season. But it was 7 points out of 9. There have been some spirited performances. There have been some fight back from disappointment and from being behind in games. And overall, it had actually been an okay start with Watford now going back into the top half after those results. So after 10 games, to go with a 30% win rate, 3 wins, 3 draws, 4 defeats, and a -1 goal difference, it's a short and not really notable stint at Watford FC. And we've seen this before, of course. Javi Gracia sacked after 4 games of a season, which we'll talk about a bit later. Rob Edwards obviously did 11 games a few years ago. And similar with Cisco after promotion to the Premier League, gone after 7 matches in the top flight. So it's not something that Watford have been afraid to do. Obviously, they get a huge amount of stick for their managerial record. And it's actually a bit of a shame because it had finally stabilised a little bit under Tom Cleverley, where the club had initially looked like they were picking up. They were starting to improve. They were showing those fighting qualities that had often been accused of not being there in recent years. But the second half of last season was wretched, and it fell into a poor trap at the start of this year as well, albeit results were starting to pick up. But we're not going to be able to cover too much on the old man because there wasn't a great deal to report on. The one thing I would say from the early stages is there were some games against teams that set up a bit more solidly, where they struggled to break them down. We saw it against Swansea. We saw it against Blackburn, against Millwall, against Charlton Athletic on the opening day, where there perhaps wasn't that inspiration or that creativity in attack. And while they did lose games, he didn't lose any of them by more than the odd goal. So he definitely kept them in games. He was certainly not a disaster of a manager, but maybe just didn't produce the inspiration, which you would argue with 10 games in charge is never going to come that quickly anyway. But alas, here we are. Watford have made the early change again. And this time, they have opted for an old face to return to the dugout. And do you know what? They got so bored of writing the statements, they didn't even bother with 2 separate ones this time. They just chucked it all into the same one. So let's have a little nose at what's been said. Watford delighted to confirm the return of Javi Gracia as head coach after deciding to part ways with Paulo Pezzolano and his backroom staff, who they thank for their efforts and commitment and wish them success for the future, all of that stuff. In appointing Javi, the club are confident he will bring the qualities we believe are vital for this young squad: consistency in team selection, maybe a little dig at the old man there, harmony within the dressing room, certainly something that's talked about before, and a strong connection with supporters. Obviously was incredibly popular for some of his achievements, which we'll talk about soon. And of course, they talk about his vision and approach aligning with objectives, the project, the plan, all of that sort of stuff. Scott Duxbury has welcomed him back to the club. His passion, leadership and clear strategy will build stability A key word from a Watford statement, and it's one that could go wrong. We saw it with the Rob Edwards one a few years ago. The famous "will back him through hell and high water" for 11 games. It's a bold word for them to use in a Watford statement, but stability is what they're looking for. Many supporters wishing that he hadn't left in 2019, and he will now take charge from after the October international break, where his first game will be in the early manager special derby as they face Sheffield United and Chris Wilder, who's not started too well down the road there. So Watford have made the change. Javi Gracia is the man coming back, and there is no doubt that Watford probably had their most successful year in their recent history under his management, because after taking charge in January 2018 and finishing that season in a 2018-19 campaign, for those who don't remember, Watford reached the FA Cup final, finished in a record high 11th place in the Premier League, and actually looked like they were going to the next level. But then, after a difficult summer, they started the season really poorly, and Gracia was sacked actually in the first international break after just 4 Premier League matches, with the club bottom and winless in the table. But he did achieve a 38% win rate, which in terms of a Premier League record is an absolutely exceptional one. And even in his managerial stint after in England, where he went to Leeds a couple of years ago, people forget, between Jesse Marsh and Sam Allardyce in that relegation year, he actually took them from 18th to 17th, and only a 25% win rate, but did actually better the rivals around him. And in the end, a little bit of an odd one that he got sacked, because they ended up going down pretty comfortably with Sam Allardyce at the helm. So it became a pretty difficult situation, because he was one of those who was probably part of the most harsh sackings era in the Watford ownership group's tenure. And he's one that was incredibly well respected by his peers and within the club. And he's one of the few that have really built a connection with the supporters over the last decade or so. So in terms of that side of things, there's no doubt that this is a good appointment. It's one to get the fans on board, certainly to get the dressing room back on board, and a couple of the key things mentioned in the statement, harmony and selection consistency, certainly something that they didn't see from the last manager, even over just a 10-game period. What I do worry about, though, from a Watford point of view, is timing. And we talk about it so much with manager specials and with appointments. The timing of them and the fixtures that follow it are always pretty crucial. Now, for Watford, one of the things we'd always traditionally seen was a brilliant home record. And to be fair, it's not been terrible this year, but they've not quite got that same sort of aura at home as they had for a sort of year period where they were phenomenal. Away from home, they've been pretty awful for about 18 months, if not longer. But the games they've got coming up at the start, of course, Sheffield United expected to be up there, but having a terrible start. But then you've got West Brom, Coventry, Middlesbrough, Ipswich, Bristol City, back-to-back. All teams expected to be up in the mix before perhaps a couple of more winnable games or games against sides expected to be lower in the table after the November international break against sort of Derby and Preston. But even then, they follow that up with some trickier games too. So in terms of timing for Javi Gracia, it's not been made easy. Given the fact that 3 of those are at home, 2 of them under the lights maybe does give a slight advantage. But some of the away games are really difficult ones against sides that have looked pretty good at home so far this year. So definitely not an ideal time for Javi Gracia to come in terms of success. And it's a Watford side that we've talked about for the last year or two has sort of grown into a little bit of a malaise, hasn't it? It's not become the side that looks like it was going to bounce back and yo-yo from Premier League to Championship. It is a team that in the last couple of years has almost become an expected mid-table Championship side. And perhaps with the board not happy that that's the situation. There are still some phenomenal players there. Musa Sissoko, while perhaps past his prime, is still a player that I'm a massive fan of. Always thought he was underrated. There are some really talented youngsters in the squad as well, which has been alluded to in that club statement, that maybe needs the right leadership to get the best out of them. And perhaps Javi Gracia, as he showed in his last spell, is someone that can get momentum and get the best out of younger players. He certainly did that in the Premier League with Watford. But this is a very different challenge. This is a Watford side that is not expected to be brilliant. It's not full of players that, for all of the managerial changes in that period in the sort of late 2010s, there was pretty much a consistent spine of the team. And maybe the illusions in the statement is that's what they want to build towards again, but with a younger side that they're going to try and knit together. It's not been the worst start in the world. It's not like he's coming into a team that is at the bottom of the table, that's had a rotten start, like Chris Wilder going back to Sheffield United. But Watford are in the top half. They're a win away from being in the playoff mix again. And there's certainly a lot to play for at this early stage if he can get it right. So there's certainly no sign of panic in terms of it being impossible to achieve this year, and maybe they felt making a change early would give them a chance of actually being consistent later in the season when it matters most. Because as much as they talk about a lot of those younger players and people that perhaps are going to need nurturing, are going to need support, are going to need good coaching, which Javi Gracia has proven throughout his career he can do, they have still got some star quality in that team and a bit of experience that they've brought into the club. I know we've mentioned Sissoko, but Imran Luzer's got that moment of magic in him. They've got people with real individual quality as well. We saw young Iran Kunda, who's produced a couple of exciting moments despite only being 19 years of age, someone who potentially could be very special over the next year or so, and a couple of good young players on loan that could make an impact as well. So it's definitely a Watford side that has got potential. Whether it's a squad that can compete with the top 3, 4, 5 in a division consistently at this stage is another question. But it's something we mentioned even as far back as the pre-season predictions this year. With a number of clubs gambling on managers that either have no championship or no English football experience, where a lot of clubs have got weaker due to issues off the pitch, and in some cases due to losing more stars to the bottom half of the Premier League teams. We have got a situation where the top sides in the championship aren't a big runaway pack, as we've seen in recent years. And we've seen that at the start of the season already. No club has won more than 5 of its 9 games at the start of the season. There's not really going to be that runaway pack of 3 or 4 as we've seen in the last couple of seasons in the championship. And if you can get it right at this stage, there's certainly a contention to be in the playoff mix. And we saw even last season, those 5th and 6th spots were up to grabs right until the very end. And Watford will want to be a part of that, I'm sure. With 11 goals scored and conceded, it's not been the most entertaining start to the season. They've not been rock solid at the back, which perhaps you wouldn't expect with a younger, more new-look defence in certain areas. And they've also struggled to create consistently from open play, with 1 or 2 games where they look like they've found the spark, and then on other times relying on individual magic, free kicks, things like that. So it's not a Watford side that has hit top form, but it's certainly not a side that is all over the place. It's not a side in crisis, as you so often see at this stage of the season. So Javi Gracia has got a base to work with. And for all of the criticism of Watford and all of the criticism of the way they get rid of managers, there's no doubt that Javi Gracia has in their time been one of their best coaches. And to go and recognise that and tempt him back to the club is, I think, a very shrewd move at this stage. Based on the squads and the consistency and maybe the depth in certain positions with injuries, I'm not sure I can tip them to be a top 6 side yet. And I don't think they're quite ready for it. But I do think they've got a better chance with Javi Gracia at the helm. And I do think it's a really good appointment. But as I mentioned before, with the timing of the games coming up, I almost feel between this and the November international break, they just need to give him a little bit of time, which is often not the case at Watford. And we do know that as a fact. But from the November international break onwards, can we then start to see the best of the team and start to be a little bit of consistency? I think that's potentially going to happen. The usual questions at these stage are, what do we say for the rest of this campaign? And what do we say for Javi Gracia? Will he see out his contract? Well, rather predictably, Watford haven't mentioned the contract length in this one, but I would suspect it's not going to be the longest one in the world or will include a break clause. I think it's a really clever appointment. I normally would like to try and pick the holes and obviously find areas where it might go wrong. But I think of the appointments available in a championship at the moment, apart from someone like Danny Roll, who I still think is the best young coach that's available to go and get for EFL clubs, there aren't many better contenders, I don't think. And it's a fit for the club that has worked before and a fit for the club where you've got a coach who's brilliant working with younger players. So I have to say, I think it's a good appointment from Watford. I'd be intrigued to see if you agree or disagree. If you're a Watford fan, if you're a Championship fan, if your team's coming up against Watford in the next few weeks, how do you think Gracia will get on? Do you think they're going to pose more or less of a challenge with him at the helm? And do you think they've got any chance of sneaking into the playoff mix? Or is the squad just short at the moment? Could he even keep them consistent enough and in the mix till January and then maybe get some backing? We never know. A short manager special because there's not a lot to reflect on with the old man. The new man isn't somebody completely new to the club. It's very much a case of going back to what you know. And as we know from down the road at Luton, that can work pretty well. So I think it's one of the best appointments Watford could have got at this point. I do feel Pezzolano probably deserved a bit more of a chance and obviously had a very good week before he was sacked. But as we've mentioned before, and we used to say it just about Watford, but it's the case of a lot of clubs now. I don't actually think it harms your CV if you go in for one short stint and struggle somewhere. I think Pezzolano will get another chance. I think he'll learn plenty from it. and I don't think it's going to be the undoing of his career. He certainly didn't dramatically fail. He maybe just didn't get some things right, particularly off the pitch, more so than on it. But Pezzolano out, Gracia in. What do you think, Watford fans? What do you think, Championship fans? Let us know down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this little video, then please do chuck a thumbs up on it. We will be back at the same time next week, of course, because we'll be returning for Match Week 10 predictions in the EFL Championship. Come and join us for those. Don't forget, you can pre-order Football Manager 26 now via our link in the description and the eye above. Help support the channel and get you 22% off. A massive thank you for watching though. Appreciate the support as always, and we'll see you again at this time next week as we get back to Championship football on the pitch.